October 20th, 1945, Nuremberg. 21 men sit in a defendant's dock as flashbulbs pop and stenographers type. The world watches through newsreel cameras as prosecutors read charges of crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. But what happens to the thousands of Nazi officials who never made it to this courtroom? How do you hunt men who built new lives with stolen names? Where do war criminals hide when the entire world is looking? The Third Reich collapsed in May 1945 after 12 years of rule across Europe. Adolf Hitler's suicide in his Berlin bunker left millions of Germans facing Allied occupation and denazification programs. While major war criminals faced trial at Nuremberg, thousands of SS officers, concentration camp guards, and Nazi administrators scattered across continents. Some fled to South America with Vatican assistance, others melted into displaced person camps with forged papers, many simply walked home and pretended the war never happened. Heinrich Müller disappears from Berlin on May 1st, 1945. The Gestapo chief, who organized deportations across occupied Europe, vanishes without a trace as Soviet shells explode around the Reich Chancellery. No body, no grave, no confirmed sighting after that date. American intelligence files from 1947 list him as missing, presumed dead, but witnesses place him in Prague 3 weeks after Berlin fell. Others claim they saw him boarding a submarine in Hamburg. Franz Stengel walks out of Linz prison camp on May 30th, 1948. The former commandant of Treblinka and Sobibor death camps had been captured by Americans in 1945, but held only as a Wehrmacht prisoner. Austrian authorities wanted him for the euthanasia program. Prison officials somehow failed to check his background properly. Stengel simply walked through the front gates during a prisoner work detail and caught a train to Rome. Bishop Alois Hudal provides him with Red Cross papers listing his occupation as mechanic. The Vatican runs a rat line through Rome that moves wanted men to South America between 1946 and 1952. Bishop Hudal and Father Krunoslav Draganovic coordinate with Argentine immigration officials to process applications. They issue international Red Cross travel documents to men with obviously false names and missing documentation. Juan Perón's government in Buenos Aires welcomes European immigrants with technical skills and anti-communist credentials. Questions about wartime activities rarely arise. Klaus Barbie arrives in La Paz, Bolivia on March 23, 1951. The former Gestapo chief of Lyon travels under the name Klaus Altmann with papers provided by American intelligence. The Counterintelligence Corps recruited Barbie in 1947 to work against Soviet agents in occupied Germany. When French authorities request his extradition for war crimes, the Americans help him disappear instead. Barbie establishes a timber business in Bolivia and becomes a respected member of German expatriate society. Adolf Eichmann settles in Buenos Aires, suburb of San Fernando, in 1952. The SS lieutenant colonel who coordinated the final solution across Europe works at a Mercedes-Benz factory under the name Ricardo Clement. His wife and children join him from Austria in 1952 after traveling on Red Cross passports. Eichmann lives quietly for 8 years, avoiding the large German community gatherings where someone might recognize him from Berlin. Joseph Mengele practices medicine in Buenos Aires without a license from 1954 to 1959. The Auschwitz doctor who conducted medical experiments on twins and disabled children uses his real name and maintains contact with his family in Germany. Argentine authorities know his identity but refuse extradition requests from West Germany. Mengele performs illegal abortions for wealthy clients and advises on livestock breeding at remote ranches. Simon Wiesenthal opens his documentation center in Vienna in 1947 with a staff of 3 volunteers and a budget of $200 per month. The Austrian Holocaust survivor compiles lists of suspected war criminals from witness testimonies and captured German records. He publishes their names and last known locations in newsletters distributed to Jewish communities worldwide. Police departments in 12 countries receive his regular bulletins with photographs and aliases. Israeli intelligence begins tracking Nazi fugitives in South America in 1957. Mossad agents establish covers as businessmen and journalists in Buenos Aires, São Paulo, and Santiago. They photograph German expatriates at social gatherings and cross-reference faces with captured SS personnel files. Agent Zvi Aharoni identifies Eichmann in March 1959 after watching him board bus number 114 in San Fernando for 6 consecutive days. The Eichmann operation launches on May 10, 1960. 8. Mossad agents grab him outside his home at 8:05 in the evening as he walks from the bus stop. They drive him to a safe house in Buenos Aires, a suburb of Don Torquato. Eichmann admits his identity within 12 hours of capture. Israeli agents hold him for 9 days while preparing forged diplomatic documents to smuggle him to Israel aboard an El Al flight. If you value documented World War II and post-war history like this, subscribe It's the best way to support our work. Now, back to the story. Eichmann's trial opens in Jerusalem on April 11th, 1961. Prosecutor Gideon Hausner reads a 15-count indictment charging crimes against the Jewish people, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and membership in hostile organizations. The proceedings are broadcast live on television to 37 countries. 112 witnesses testify over 4 months. The 3-judge panel hears testimony in German, Hebrew, English, French, Polish, and Yiddish. Franz Stangl works as maintenance supervisor at Volkswagen factory in São Paulo from 1954 to 1967. Brazilian immigration records list him as Gustav Wagner, a mechanic from Vienna. Stangl maintains regular correspondence with his wife and daughters in Austria. He sends monthly payments through a Swiss bank account opened with Vatican assistance in Rome. Austrian police place his family under surveillance but never find evidence of his location. Nazi hunter Bate Klarsfeld tracks Stangl to Brazil in February 1967. The German student activist receives a tip from a former Sobibor prisoner who recognized Stangl's photograph in a São Paulo newspaper. Brazilian police arrest him at the Volkswagen factory on February 28th, after Austria files formal extradition papers. Stangl spends 13 months fighting deportation through Brazilian courts before authorities put him on a flight to Vienna. Klaus Barbie lives openly in La Paz for 32 years using his real name. The former Gestapo officer becomes a Bolivian citizen in 1957 and operates businesses, including a lumber company, a quinine factory, and several restaurants. He advises Bolivian military intelligence on interrogation techniques during the 1960s. French Nazi hunter Serge Klarsfeld locates Barbie in 1972, but Bolivia refuses extradition requests. The Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo demonstrate in Buenos Aires every Thursday from April 1977 onwards. They demand information about children disappeared during Argentina's military dictatorship. Some carry photographs of infants taken from pregnant women in detention centers. Witnesses later testify that military doctors performed medical experiments on prisoners using techniques learned from Nazi fugitives, including Mengele, Joseph. Mengele dies of a stroke while swimming at Bertioga Beach, Brazil, on February 7, 1979. The Auschwitz doctor lived under the name Wolfgang Gerhard since 1961, staying with German expatriate families in rural São Paulo state. His body remains unidentified for 6 years until forensic experts confirm his identity through dental records in 1985. Mengele had contacted his son in Germany just weeks before his death. John Demjanjuk stands trial in Jerusalem from February 1987 to April 1988. The retired Cleveland auto worker was extradited from the United States after Holocaust survivors identified him as Ivan the Terrible, a gas chamber operator at Treblinka death camp. The Israeli court sentences him to death in April 1988. 5 years later, newly discovered Soviet documents prove the witnesses confused him with another Ukrainian guard named Ivan Marchenko. Klaus Barbie faces trial in Lyon, France, in May 1987. The 83-year-old defendant sits motionless as prosecutors read charges including deportation of Jewish children from an orphanage in Iziu. French authorities extradited him from Bolivia in February 1983 after the government changed and canceled his citizenship. The trial lasts 6 weeks. 41 witnesses testify, including resistance fighters and Holocaust survivors. Operation Last Chance begins in 2002 under Simon Wiesenthal Center coordination. The program offers rewards up to $25,000 for information leading to war crimes, prosecutions. Investigators receive over 3,000 tips in the first year alone. Most suspects are now in their 80s and 90s. German prosecutors opened 400 new cases between 2000 and 2015. Friedrich Karl Berger dies in Germany on January 2nd. 2021. The 95-year-old former concentration camp guard had been deported from Tennessee 3 months earlier after living in the United States for 70 years. Immigration judges ruled that his service at Neuengamme subcamps made him inadmissible under American law. Berger claimed he was only following orders and never harmed anyone directly. The Zentrale Stelle investigates Nazi war crimes from Ludwigsburg, Germany since 1958. Prosecutors have opened over 100,000 preliminary investigations and initiated over 7,000 criminal proceedings. Only 19 defendants received sentences of 10 years or more. Most cases ended with acquittals, minor sentences, or dismissals due to lack of evidence or defendant deaths. Oscar Groening testifies at his trial in Lüneburg, Germany in April 2015. The 93-year-old former Auschwitz bookkeeper admits moral guilt but denies legal responsibility for mass murder. He tells the court he witnessed gas chamber operations and sorted currency taken from arriving prisoners. The judges sentence him to 4 years in prison as an accessory to murder in 300,000 cases. Anna Segers. documents Nazi crimes through the Wiener Holocaust Library in London from 1949 until her death in 1983. The Austrian researcher interviews over 15,000 Holocaust survivors and compiles testimonies in 17 languages. Her archives contain more than 1 million documents, including Nazi personnel files, concentration camp records, and war crimes investigation reports from Allied authorities. The last major Nazi war crimes trial opens in Hamburg, Germany, on October 23, 2020. Friedrich Karl B., a 93-year-old former Stutthof concentration camp guard, faces charges as accessory to murder in 5,230 cases. The defendant admits serving at the camp, but claims he never participated in killings. German prosecutors argue that all camp personnel enabled the murder machinery through their presence and duties. Evidence continues emerging from newly opened archives in Eastern Europe and Russia. Historians discovered documents in Polish archives in 2018 proving that Vatican officials knowingly provided escape assistance to wanted war criminals. The papers include letters from Bishop Hudel requesting travel documents for men he identified as former SS officers seeking to avoid prosecution. Franz Stangl dies in Düsseldorf prison on June 28, 1971. The former Treblinka commandant suffered a heart attack 18 hours after completing his final interview with author Gita Sereni. During their conversations, Stangl admitted knowing about mass killings at both death camps he commanded. He maintained that he personally never killed anyone and was simply following orders from superiors in Berlin. Klaus Barbie dies in Lyon Prison Hospital on September 25, 1991, while serving a life sentence. The former Gestapo chief never expressed remorse for his wartime actions. He claimed during his trial that he was a soldier following legitimate military orders. French authorities buried him in an unmarked grave after his family declined to claim the body. Heinrich Müller's fate remains unknown. The former Gestapo chief has no confirmed grave, death certificate, or reliable witness testimony placing him anywhere after May 1, 1945. American intelligence files declassified in 2001 contain 17 separate reports claiming to have located him in locations including Switzerland, Argentina, Czechoslovakia, and the Soviet Union. None proved accurate upon investigation. The Central Office of State Justice Administrations closed its final Nazi war crimes investigation on September 1, 2021. Prosecutors reviewed evidence against Friedrich Karl B., but dropped charges due to insufficient proof of specific criminal acts. The defendant died of natural causes 2 months later at age 94. German authorities estimate fewer than 12 suspected Nazi war criminals remain alive worldwide. Gustav Wagner operates a ranch in Atabaia, Brazil, from 1950 to 1978. The former deputy commandant of Sobibor death camp raises cattle and grows coffee under his real name. Local police know his identity but refuse extradition requests from West Germany, Austria, and Poland. Wagner maintains regular contact with other Nazi fugitives, including Franz Stangl, through coded letters delivered by German expatriate couriers. Walter Rauff designs mobile gas vans that killed over 100,000 people in occupied Soviet territories. The SS colonel escapes American custody in 1946 and reaches Syria with Vatican assistance. Rauff works for Syrian intelligence services from 1948 to 1955, training officers in interrogation techniques. He moves to Ecuador in 1955. Then Chile in 1958, where he operates import businesses and advises Augusto Pinochet's secret police. The Ludwigsburg Central Office opens 412 preliminary investigations between 1958 and 1965. Prosecutors issue arrest warrants for 217 suspects still at large worldwide. Only 43 cases proceed to trial. German courts impose sentences averaging 18 months for defendants convicted of war crimes. Most serve less than 1 year due to time already spent in custody during proceedings. Martin Bormann's remains are discovered during construction work in Berlin on December 7, 1972. The former Nazi Party chancellor and Hitler's private secretary disappeared from the Reich Chancellery bunker on May 2, 1945. Soviet documents released in 1968 claimed Bormann died crossing the Weidendammer Bridge while attempting to escape Berlin. Forensic analysis confirms the skeleton belongs to Bormann and shows traces of cyanide poisoning. Alois Brunner commands Drancy internment camp near Paris from June 1943 to August 1944. The SS captain organizes deportations of 24,000 French Jews to Auschwitz and other death camps. American forces capture him in May 1945, but he escapes from a prisoner camp in Austria 6 months later. Brunner reaches Syria in 1948 with forged Vatican documents listing his occupation as teacher. The Syrian government employs Brunner as security advisor from 1950 to 1991. He trains interrogators for the Damascus regime and helps establish torture centers and military prisons. Letter bombs sent by Israeli agents in 1961 and 1980 cost Brunner 4 fingers on his left hand and sight in one eye. Syrian officials refused repeated extradition requests from France, Germany, and Austria throughout the Cold War period. Hermine Braunsteiner marries an American construction worker in 1959 and moves to Queens, New York. The former Majdanek concentration camp guard becomes a United States citizen in 1963 under her married name Ryan. Holocaust survivor testimony in the early 1970s identifies her as the woman who stomped children to death with steel-reinforced boots. American authorities strip her citizenship and extradite her to West Germany in 1973. John Ivan Demjanjuk works at Ford Motor Company in Cleveland for 27 years before his first deportation to Israel in 1986. The Ukrainian-born auto worker enters the United States in 1952 using displaced person papers that omit his service as a guard at Nazi death camps. The Office of Special Investigations discovers his Troniki training camp identification card in Soviet archives in 1976. The Troniki training facility in occupied Poland produces over 5,000 auxiliary guards between October 1941 and July 1944. SS officers recruit prisoners of war and civilians from Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, and other Eastern European countries. Trainees receive 6 weeks of instruction in weapons handling, camp procedures, and prisoner control methods. Most graduates serve at Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec death camps. Operation Paperclip brings 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians to the United States between 1945 and 1959. American intelligence officers ignore Nazi Party membership and wartime activities when recruiting specialists in rocketry, chemical weapons, and aviation medicine. Werner von Braun leads the team that develops Saturn rockets for the Apollo moon program despite using slave labor at his V-2 rocket factory during the war. Arthur Rudolph manages production at the Mittelwerk underground factory where 20,000 prisoners die building V-2 rockets. The German engineer emigrates to the United States in 1945 and becomes an American citizen in 1954. Rudolph develops the Saturn V rocket as technical director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. The Office of Special Investigations forces him to renounce his citizenship and leave America in 1984. Hubertus Strughold conducts high-altitude medical experiments on prisoners at Dachau concentration camp from 1942 to 1945. The Luftwaffe doctor tests human endurance limits in low-pressure chambers that kill dozens of subjects. American officials recruit Strughold for aerospace medicine research in 1947. He becomes chief scientist of the Air Force School of Aviation Medicine and earns recognition as the father of space medicine. The Mauthausen trial convenes in Dachau, Germany from March 29th to May 13th, 1946. American military prosecutors charged 61 defendants, including camp commandants, guards, and capos with war crimes and crimes against humanity. The court sentences 58 men to death and 3 to life imprisonment. Allied authorities execute 45 defendants by hanging between May 27th and May 28th, in 1947 at Landsberg prison. Concentration camp, capos faced prosecution alongside SS personnel in post-war trials. These prisoner functionaries supervised work details and maintained order inside camps in exchange for better food and living conditions. Many capos brutalized fellow inmates to prove loyalty to their captors. American, British, and Soviet authorities execute over 300 capos between 1945 and 1950 for war crimes committed against other prisoners. Adolf Eichmann provides detailed testimony about the final solution during interrogation sessions in Israeli custody from May to December 1960. The SS Lieutenant Colonel describes the Wannsee Conference planning meeting, deportation logistics across occupied Europe, and coordination between Nazi agencies. Transcripts of his statements total over 3,600 pages and become key evidence in later war crimes. Prosecutions. The Eichmann trial establishes legal precedent for prosecuting crimes against humanity decades after they occurred. Israeli prosecutors argue that certain acts are so heinous they remain punishable regardless of time limitations or jurisdictional boundaries. The Jerusalem District Court sentences Eichmann to death on December 15th in 1961. Israeli authorities execute him by hanging at Ramla prison on May 31st, 1962. Mengele family business profits exceed 4 million Deutschmarks annually during the 1950s and 60s. The Bavarian Agricultural Machinery Company continues paying monthly stipends to Joseph Mengele throughout his exile in South America. Family members visit him in Argentina and Brazil, but deny knowledge of his wartime activities when questioned by German prosecutors. The company eventually sells in 1984 to avoid continued association with the Mengele name. The Fritz Bauer Institute in Frankfurt coordinates Holocaust research and war crimes documentation from 1995 onwards. Prosecutor Fritz Bauer initiated the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials in 1963, despite opposition from German judicial officials who preferred to forget the Nazi period. The Institute maintains databases of perpetrator information, victim testimonies, and trial records accessible to researchers worldwide. Demjanjuk returns to Cleveland in 1993 after the Israeli Supreme Court overturns his death sentence based on new evidence from Soviet archives. American immigration officials immediately begin deportation proceedings based on his service at other Nazi camps, including Sobibor and Flossenburg. Legal appeals delay his removal for 16 years until immigration agents escort him to Germany in May 2009. The Munich Regional Court tries Demjanjuk as accessory to murder in 28,060 cases from November 2009 to May 2011. Prosecutors argue that all death camp guards participated in mass murder, regardless of their specific duties. The 88-year-old defendant attends only 42 of 109 court sessions due to health problems. Judges sentence him to 5 years in prison, but he dies 7 months later while appealing. Soviet archives release KGB files on Nazi war criminals in 1991 after the USSR collapse. Documents reveal that Soviet intelligence recruited dozens of former SS officers and Wehrmacht generals as informants during the Cold War. The files contain interrogation records, cooperation agreements, and evidence of war crimes that Western prosecutors never obtained. Russian authorities share limited portions of these materials with German investigators. The Wiesenthal Center's operation Last Chance identifies over 3,000 suspected Nazi war criminals still alive in 2002. Investigators focus on guards, policemen, and auxiliary personnel rather than high-ranking officers who died decades earlier. Most suspects live in the United States, Canada, Australia, and Germany. The program results in over 100 investigations, but only 8 successful prosecutions due to advanced ages and evidentiary challenges. Friedrich Karl Berger admits serving as guard at Neuengamme concentration camp subcamps during immigration court hearings in Memphis, Tennessee. The 94-year-old retiree emigrated to America in 1955 without disclosing his Nazi service. Immigration judge Rebecca Holt orders his removal in February 2020 based on his participation in Nazi persecution. Berger lives quietly in Tennessee for 65 years before neighbors learn his identity. The last Auschwitz trial opens in Detmold, Germany on February 11, 2016. Reinhold Hanning, a 94-year-old former SS guard, faces charges as accessory to murder in 170,000 cases. The defendant admits serving at Auschwitz but denies knowledge of mass killings. Prosecutors argue that guards could not avoid seeing trains arriving daily with thousands of prisoners who never left the camp. Hanning receives 5 years imprisonment but dies in 2017 before beginning his sentence. The Detmold court heard testimony from dozens of Auschwitz survivors who traveled from around the world to confront their former captor. Leon Schwarzbaum, age 95, tells Hanning directly that he remembers him from the camp ramp where selections took place daily. Nazi documentation efforts begin immediately after liberation, as Allied forces discover extensive German records. The Nuremberg prosecution team reviews over 3,000 tons of captured documents to prepare cases against major war criminals. Military investigators photograph, catalog, and translate millions of pages, including deportation lists, medical experiment records, and execution orders signed by camp officials. The Fortunoff Video Archive at Yale University preserves testimonies from over 4,000 Holocaust survivors recorded between 1979 and 2015. Survivors describe their experiences in concentration camps, ghettos, and hiding places across Nazi-occupied Europe. Many testimonies identify perpetrators by name and provide details used in later criminal investigations and trials. Files opened in Vatican archives in 2019 revealed that Pope Pius XII personally approved assistance for Nazi fugitives seeking passage to South America. The documents show church officials provided travel funds, forged documents, and safe houses for wanted war criminals, including several concentration camp commandants. Cardinal Giovanni Montini, later Pope Paul VI, signed authorization letters for at least 43 suspects between 1946 and 1952. The Vatican never prosecuted a single official for these activities, and the rat lines operated until 1955, when international pressure finally forced their closure.